There was a night, not long ago, when a technician at Skinwalker Ranch sat watching a monitor that showed nothing at all. No spike, no flicker, no irregularity worth flagging in the log. And that, more than anything dramatic that had happened before, was what made him uneasy. The Mesa has never behaved like the rest of the property. Homestead, too, has its history. The triangle has its patterns of animal disturbance and light. But the Mesa carries a different weight entirely, a wall of stone at the edge of the ranch that has, for years, seemed less like a geological feature and more like a boundary between what can be measured and what cannot. Cameras trained on its face have captured things that do not resolve easily into ordinary explanation. Equipment placed near it has behaved as though the rock itself were interfering with something deeper than radio waves. People who work on the ranch speak of it with a caution that borders on reverence, the way you might speak about a door you're not sure should be opened again. For a long stretch, that door seemed closed. The instruments kept recording, night after night, and what they recorded was ordinary. Wind moving through brush, temperature drifting down after sunset, the occasional false alarm quickly resolved. To an outside observer, this might have looked like good news, a haunted place finally settling down. But the researchers who have spent years on this property know better than to read silence as safety. At Skinwalker Ranch, quiet has a history of being a held breath, not an ending. Erik Bard, the ranch's principal investigator, had built much of the monitoring system specifically to strip away rumor and leave only data. Brandon Fugal, who purchased the property in 2016 and reopened it to sustain scientific inquiry, had insisted on exactly that kind of discipline. Dr. Travis Taylor, an astrophysicist with a background in aerospace engineering, brought the instinct to test rather than assume. None of them were the type to manufacture mystery where none existed, which is part of why the extended stillness at the Mesa bothered them more than it reassured them. If the ranch has taught its investigators anything, it's that the absence of anomalies is rarely proof that nothing is happening. Sometimes it simply means the system is between events. So the sensors stayed on. The cameras kept their long, patient watch on the rock face, and the team waited, not for confirmation that the Mesa had gone dormant, but for the moment it would prove, once again, that it hadn't. That moment did not arrive with alarms or flashing lights. It arrived quietly, the way most real discoveries do, as a technician scrolling through overnight data noticed something that didn't match the pattern it should have. A reading near the Mesa had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way that screamed for attention, but it was there, sitting slightly outside the boundaries of what months of baseline data had established as normal. The first instinct wasn't excitement, it was suspicion. Before anyone allowed themselves to consider what the reading might mean, they had to rule out what it probably was: a loose connection, a miscalibrated sensor, interference from a passing vehicle, or a change in weather. Skinwalker Ranch has absorbed enough criticism over the years, some of it fair, for careless claims and imagery that didn't hold up to scrutiny. The team's response to anything strange has become almost reflexive. Assume error first, earn the anomaly. So they checked the hardware. They cross-referenced timestamps. They pulled recent weather data and compared it against the signal. They swapped out the sensor entirely just to see if the reading would vanish along with the equipment. It didn't. The pattern persisted, not just in one instrument but corroborated faintly across a second system nearby, which made it considerably harder to dismiss as a fluke. What set this apart from the noise the Mesa had produced in the past wasn't magnitude. It was consistency. The change held its position. It repeated. And when a reading survives the kind of scrutiny designed to kill it, the only responsible next step is to stop trying to explain it away and start trying to understand it. For Bard, the moment carried an echo of something personal. Years earlier, near this same stretch of ground, his phone had begun flickering in a way he couldn't reproduce under normal conditions, and he and others nearby had described a subtle sense that the ground itself was tilting beneath them. That experience had pushed him toward an unconventional hypothesis that some of what people felt and witnessed on the ranch might be tied to localized electromagnetic disturbance, not something supernatural in the traditional sense. He had gone so far as to test it, placing a phone near a rare earth magnet capable of lifting nearly 2,000 pounds of iron, and watching the same kind of flicker appear on command. It didn't explain everything, but it proved that at least some of the ranch's strangeness left a physical signature. Now, watching the new data come in, he found himself wondering whether the Mesa was leaving that signature again. To understand why a single anomalous reading could carry this much weight, it helps to understand that the Mesa has never offered investigators just one mystery to solve. It has offered a slow accumulation of them, stacked across years, some visual, some instrumental, some little more than uneasy testimony that resists confirmation. There is the older history, the reluctance among some in the surrounding area to approach the formation at all, folklore that predates any modern instrumentation. There are the more recent, better documented incidents, unexplained electromagnetic disturbances, batteries that drain without cause, aerial objects that move in ways inconsistent with known aircraft or wildlife, and footage that appears to show something entering the rock face itself and something else emerging from it moments later along the same plane. In one experiment, canisters dropped from several thousand feet above the ranch appeared to drift against the wind in ways the team could not fully attribute to atmospheric conditions, as though something in the airspace had nudged them off course. Then there is what may lie beneath the surface. When investigators drilled into the Mesa years ago, chasing long-standing rumors of a hidden void, the drill met resistance that behaved unlike ordinary stone, pushed downward from one angle, forced upward from another, consistent with an oval obstruction buried within the rock. Metal fragments recovered from the drilling were later examined at the University of Utah, where researchers noted similarities to composite materials used in aerospace heat shielding. That finding didn't prove anything extraordinary was hidden inside the Mesa, but it made it impossible to treat the formation as simply a striking piece of scenery. Even with all of this accumulated history, the researchers resist calling the pattern cyclical. A cycle implies rhythm, predictable intervals, repeatable triggers, something a calendar could capture. The Mesa has never cooperated with that kind of order. Activity clusters, then disappears for months. Conditions that seem to precede one event mean nothing before the next. Some phenomena occur at the rock face, others occur in the sky above it, or in the surrounding pasture entirely. If there is an underlying structure to it, no one on this team has yet found the mathematics to describe it, and that absence of a clean model may be the most frustrating part of the entire investigation, because science wants order, and the Mesa keeps offering fragments instead. Faced with a reading that refused to resolve into a simple explanation, the team did what they've always done at this stage. They turned to instrumentation, methodically and without fanfare. Magnetometers went back into active rotation because if Bard's electromagnetic theory held even partial truth, shifts in the local field might precede or accompany whatever was building near the Mesa. Radiation and gamma detectors were repositioned as a matter of both curiosity and basic safety, given that past episodes elsewhere on the property had produced localized spikes worth ruling out. Thermal cameras were angled to catch temperature differentials the naked eye would miss, while high-speed and low-light optical systems were paired alongside standard cameras to reduce the odds that something brief would simply be lost between frames. LiDAR scans were run to compare the Mesa's current surface geometry against prior mapping, searching for any subtle shift, a new void, a change in density, anything the eye alone couldn't register. Ground-penetrating methods remained part of the broader plan as well, because if the mystery truly lived beneath the surface, then the rock itself needed to become a source of data, not just a backdrop. Almost immediately, the team ran into the kind of trouble the desert always seems to produce. Batteries drained faster than expected in one specific area while behaving normally just a short distance away. A drone lost stable positioning data at a location where nothing about the visual conditions had changed. A camera feed stuttered at nearly the same moment another instrument logged a deviation in its own readings. None of these things, taken individually, would raise an eyebrow anywhere else. Together, clustered in the same footprint of ground, they raised the same question the team keeps returning to again and again. Why here, and only here? Then came the incident that stopped even the most composed members of the team mid-sentence. It happened in real time, under direct observation, with more than one person watching and more than one instrument recording. Accounts differ slightly depending on where each observer was standing and which screen they happened to be watching, but the core of it stayed consistent. Something appeared in the monitored airspace near the mesa where there should have been nothing but empty sky. It held a thermal and visual signature distinct from the background. It moved in a way that tracked briefly against the terrain below it, and then it left the frame in a manner that didn't match any expected exit path. Not a drone descending, not a bird breaking off, not a reflection catching the wrong angle of light. The team ran through the standard explanations in the order they always do. Whether first, could dust, humidity, or a thermal layer have distorted what the cameras picked up? Then equipment, could this be a lens artifact, a compression glitch, a synchronization error between systems? Then human perception. Was someone simply primed to see significance because they were already watching so closely for it? Each of those questions deserved to be asked, and each was asked seriously. But none of them, on their own or together, accounted for everything the recording showed. That is often the real difficulty with the Mesa's stranger moments. Any single layer of the event can usually be reduced to something ordinary. A visual anomaly can be chalked up to optics. A signal spike can be blamed on interference. A moment of disorientation can be attributed to stress or suggestion. What makes these cases resistant to easy dismissal is that the layers rarely stay separate. A visual event lines up with an instrument reading. A hardware disruption occurs at the same instant someone reports feeling suddenly unwell. The explanations that work cleanly in isolation begin to fracture once the layers are stacked together. One investigator, reviewing the footage afterward, described the moment not with excitement but with a kind of clipped, careful restraint, the tone of someone choosing every word deliberately, unwilling to overstate what they'd seen and equally unwilling to pretend they hadn't seen it. That tone, more than any single frame of video, told the rest of the team how seriously to take what had happened. Instruments can only tell part of this story. The rest belongs to the people who have stood near the mesa while it was active, and who came away describing something the equipment never quite captured. Their accounts tend not to sound like polished paranormal testimony. They are hesitant, partial, sometimes almost embarrassed in their delivery, which paradoxically is part of what makes them difficult to dismiss. People describe a sudden pressure, as though the air itself had thickened, a flicker of nausea that passed as quickly as it arrived, a shift in mood that felt less like fear and more like being subtly out of place, as if their own sense of position in the world had been nudged slightly off-center. Bard's early experience, the flickering phone, the sensation that the ground was gently turning beneath him, remains one of the clearest examples, in part because it later connected so directly to his electromagnetic research. Others describe something closer to a blur in their sense of time, not quite lost minutes, but a feeling that attention itself had briefly slipped out of sequence. None of this qualifies as hard measurement. The team is careful to say so. Human perception bends easily under expectation, and a place with the Mesa's reputation will always risk contaminating its own witnesses. But dismissing these reports outright would be its own kind of bias, especially when they keep clustering around the same coordinates, the same windows of time, the same instrument disturbances. During one experiment near the base of the Mesa, a small group taking part in a ceremonial exercise stopped early, uncomfortable and reporting a sense of being watched from above the rocks. Footage reviewed afterward showed aerial anomalies in that same area, during that same window. None of it proves causation, but it preserves something almost as valuable in an unresolved case, correlation strong enough to keep serious people from looking away. So where does that leave the explanations themselves? The most conservative theory remains geological and electromagnetic. The Uinta Basin is a genuinely complex environment, and if the mesa contains conductive minerals, internal cavities, or buried metallic material from some long-forgotten human activity, that alone could account for field disturbances, equipment failures, and even some of the disorientation reported by witnesses. It's the theory with the most scientific dignity because it requires the fewest leaps of faith, and because pieces of it are at least partially testable. But it strains under the weight of the visual cases, the apparent structured movement in the sky, the object appearing to enter the rock face and another appearing to leave it. Electromagnetic interference doesn't easily explain that kind of behavior. Atmospheric and optical distortion has also been carefully considered. Heat shimmer, dust, reflection, sensor overexposure, all familiar culprits capable of turning ordinary light into something that looks impossible. Investigators here have spent years training themselves to catch these tricks, and still, some of what remains after ruling them out doesn't resolve into anything conventional. It may still be mundane. If so, it's mundane in a way no one has yet managed to properly name. Beyond that, the team enters more speculative territory, and they do so carefully. Words like portal or threshold aren't used because the physics supports them outright. They're used because ordinary observational language keeps failing to describe what the footage shows. Saying an object lost tracking is honest and responsible. It also doesn't erase the visual impression of something entering solid rock and something else leaving it. Taylor, drawing on his physics and aerospace background, has floated bolder hypotheses, not as declarations of belief, but as a way of testing whether the team's existing toolbox is even large enough to hold what they're observing. So far, none of those hypotheses has done what a real theory must do: account for the entire pattern while predicting what comes next. Which is exactly why skeptics remain an essential part of this story, not an obstacle to it. The skeptical case is straightforward and deserves to be taken seriously. Skinwalker Ranch carries decades of legend, a documented history of confirmation bias, and now the added pressure of televised exposure, which can reward ambiguity over resolution. Instruments fail in harsh environments as a matter of course. Viewers, and sometimes investigators, can be primed to see significance in noise. Earlier chapters of the ranch's history include claims that didn't hold up once examined closely, and the team is candid about that record. Seen through this lens, the Mesa might be less a doorway into something unknown and more a mirror reflecting how eager people are to find pattern inside uncertainty. That argument holds real weight, and the researchers themselves often make versions of it before anyone else has the chance to. But even granting every fair criticism, this particular sequence of events resists comfortable dismissal because it isn't built from a single ambiguous clip or one uncorroborated feeling. It rests on named investigators, repeated instrumentation, a documented subsurface anomaly, cross-reference timestamps, and a decades-long institutional record, more than 150 witnesses and over 500 logged incidents during the period the property was studied under a Pentagon link program alone. None of that proves the extraordinary. It does, at minimum, earn the question. Inside the team, the disagreement is real and ongoing. One investigator leans harder toward the physics, convinced the answer is buried somewhere in field behavior and mineral composition. Another insists on keeping the aperture wider, unwilling to rule out something closer to unknown agency. One wants more sensors before another word is spoken. Another believes the pattern has already earned a more direct question than the team has been willing to ask aloud. That tension, uncomfortable as it is, may be the most trustworthy element of the entire investigation. Certainty would be easier to sell. It would also, in this case, be dishonest. What makes the renewed activity at the Mesa compelling isn't that it forces a single conclusion. It's that it keeps surviving the elimination of every lesser one. Laid against the ranch's long operational history, from earlier ownership through the years of formal government-linked study to the current investigation under Fugal, a sober picture starts to take shape. What is known? The Mesa has repeatedly produced instrumentation anomalies, visual events that resist conventional explanation, and consistent reports of human disorientation in its immediate vicinity. There is documented evidence of a subsurface obstruction that drilling has never satisfactorily resolved. There is footage, reviewed by multiple investigators, showing apparent interaction between objects and the rock face itself. There is an electromagnetic thread substantial enough to have shaped one researcher's entire working theory of the property. What remains unknown is just as important to state plainly. No one has identified the mechanism linking these events. No one knows what, if anything, actually lies within or beneath the Mesa. No one can say with confidence whether the aerial anomalies represent the limits of current instrumentation or something genuinely outside it. And no one can yet separate what the human witnesses feel from environment, suggestion, or some undocumented physical effect still waiting for a name. At a certain point, conventional explanation doesn't vanish. It simply stops covering the whole field. And that is where the weight of this investigation now sits, not in spectacle, not in easy answers, but in the honest, uncomfortable space where the science runs out before the questions do. There is a kind of integrity in a researcher willing to say, plainly, I don't know, on this ranch. That admission carries more credibility than any promise of a final revelation ever could. The team has not solved the Mesa. They have not proven a portal in any scientific sense, and they are careful never to claim otherwise. What they have done is something harder to live with, and perhaps more valuable. They have kept watching after the easy explanations ran out. If future monitoring shows that this recent activity was simply a transient flare, a temporary cluster of electromagnetic noise, a geological quirk dressed in unfamiliar language, then the science will have done exactly what it's supposed to do, narrowing the unknown one careful step at a time. But if the pattern holds, if the readings return again, if the visual anomalies keep aligning with instrument disturbances and first-hand human accounts, then the Mesa may represent something rarer than a mystery waiting to be solved. It may represent a real, persistent phenomenon that our current categories simply aren't built to hold. That is not a comforting thought. It was never meant to be. Because the most unsettling possibility raised by the Mesa isn't that something monstrous waits inside the rock, or that a doorway sits open somewhere on that ridge. It's the far quieter suggestion that nature, or technology, or something occupying the uneasy space between those two words, may still contain behavior our science can only describe at the edges, enough to measure, not yet enough to understand. So the question that opened this story remains exactly where the researchers themselves have left it. Why did the Mesa fall silent, and why, without warning, did it begin to answer again? No one at Skinwalker Ranch can say with confidence. Not Brandon Fugal, who funds the work and still refuses to reach for cheap certainty. Not Erik Bard, whose best evidence continues to stop just short of explanation. Not Travis Taylor, who can imagine bold models of what might be happening, but cannot honestly claim that any one of them has won. The instruments have spoken, but not plainly. The witnesses have described what they felt, but not in terms precise enough to settle anything. And the rock has offered fragments, interference, vanishing tracks. One persistent refusal to behave like an ordinary wall of stone. Perhaps that is the truest ending available for now. The Mesa does not close the case. It holds it open. Silent when watched too closely, active when least convenient. It offers just enough evidence to keep serious people returning, and never quite enough to let them leave with certainty. In that unresolved tension sits the real mystery, not a tidy answer buried somewhere in the stone, but a phenomenon that appears, withdraws, and returns on terms that remain entirely its own. For the scientist standing at its base, that is frustrating in the deepest sense. For the rest of us, watching from a distance, it is something else as well, a reminder that an honest mystery carries far more weight than a solved one ever could. And on that ridge in the Utah desert, the Mesa remains exactly what it has always been. Not an ending, not yet an explanation. A question that has simply learned how to wait.